Today on RoxomTV News, Ghislaine Maxwell is set to testify before Congress, reopening one of the most disturbing scandals of our time and raising big questions about who knew what and when. Plus, former Bank of England analyst is warning that, yes, aliens could trigger a global financial meltdown and that people would run to Bitcoin. But first, Trump says he's not taking Greenland by force anymore, but he did cut a deal that gives the U.S. a whole lot more control than it used to have. All that and more right now on today's show. Let's get into it. Welcome back, everyone, to our Thursday edition here at RoxomTV News. I'm your host, Hank Hudson. Our first story this morning is coming after weeks of aggressive rhetoric, force threats, and tariff intimidation as President Donald Trump struck a noticeably different tone this week on the global stage. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos on Wednesday, Trump announced that military action to secure Greenland was now off the table, and that his proposed tariffs on European imports were being shelved. It marked a sharp departure from the pressure-heavy posture he had adopted in the weeks leading up to the summit. Here's how he described that shift. Let's take a listen.
I'm mad because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland, where we already had it, as a trustee, but respectfully returned it back to Denmark not long ago after we defeated the Germans, the Japanese, the Italians, and others in World War II. We gave it back to them.
Now, according to sources speaking with Reuters, that reversal did not happen spontaneously. It followed growing concern inside Trump's own team, where senior aides reportedly warned that the rhetoric was beginning to alarm key U.S. allies and risk broader diplomatic rupture at a moment of already heightened geopolitical instability. European officials in particular were becoming increasingly uneasy about how quickly what began as strategic pressure was starting to resemble something far more volatile. Trump, however, framed the pivot not as a retreat, but as progress. The following day, he announced that he had spoken with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte about what he called a framework of a future deal involving Greenland and the wider Arctic. He presented the conversation as the beginning of a longer-term strategic realignment rather than a climb down. Now, that announcement, though, still carried Trump's familiar edge. Even as he described the talks as constructive, he criticized local leaders for what he called a lack of appreciation for U.S. involvement and support. Here's how he put it.
And then after the war, which we won it big. Without us, right now you'd all be speaking German and a little Japanese, perhaps. After the war, we gave Greenland back to Denmark. How stupid were we to do that? But we did it. But we gave it back. But how ungrateful are they now?
So what exactly is this framework that Trump keeps referencing? Well, according to European officials briefed on the discussions, it would give the United States expanded military and economic access to Greenland without formally changing its sovereignty. Greenland would not become an American territory. There would be no transfer of ownership, no redrawing of borders, no formal change in political control. What would change is the scale of U.S. involvement. Now, the outline of the deal reportedly includes the potential stationing of additional U.S. missile systems on the island, a larger NATO security presence focused on Arctic operations, and expanded U.S. mining rights in Greenland's critical minerals sector, an area of growing strategic importance as countries compete for materials used in advanced technologies, batteries, and military systems. Officials familiar with the talks say one of the core goals is to block Chinese involvement in that sector, reflecting broader concerns about Beijing's expanding footprint in strategically sensitive regions. The arrangement would also refresh the 1951 U.S.-Denmark Defense Agreement, which already grants Washington broad latitude to operate militarily on the island under NATO auspices. Now, what's new here is not access, but it's the scale. You see, in exchange for these expanded privileges, Trump would stand down from opposing tariffs on European countries, a trade-off that helps explain the abrupt de-escalation after weeks of threats. Or, in other words, this has shifted from an open confrontation to uneasy negotiation. But while the tone has changed, the strategic stakes have not. Now, despite Trump's rhetorical retreat, Greenland remains a critical geopolitical flashpoint. The island is already part of NATO through Denmark, and the United States maintains a long-standing military access under the 1951 Defense Agreement, which allows Washington to deploy forces to defend Greenland or other NATO territories. NATO officials now say the focus is on strengthening Arctic security cooperation rather than revisiting sovereignty. Rudd has emphasized that alliance members must do more to address growing Russian and Chinese activity in the region without undermining unity. European leaders, however, remain wary. Denmark and Greenland's elected leadership have repeatedly rejected any suggestion that the island's future could be decided externally. France and Germany have warned that Trump's earlier threats crossed a diplomatic line. The episode has reinforced long-standing concerns in Europe about U.S. unpredictability, even as officials acknowledge that Washington already wields significant influence in Greenland through defense arrangements, infrastructure, and intelligence cooperation. Now, behind the scenes, U.S. officials say Trump's fascination with Greenland continues to collide with legal and political reality. Some aides pushed to keep maximal pressure on the table. Others urged a narrower approach focused on investment, security guarantees, and Arctic governance. That internal split helps explain the abrupt reversals that have defined the past month. Tariff threats announced, then dropped. Force left ambiguous and then completely ruled out. For now, the Greenland dispute has shifted from open confrontation to uneasy negotiation, but diplomats caution that the underlying tensions have not disappeared. Now, the question facing Washington and its allies is no longer whether the U.S. can seize Greenland. It's a notion now broadly rejected, but how far Trump will push to reshape Arctic arrangements and whether NATO can absorb that pressure without fracturing at a moment of rising geopolitical competition. Now, markets responded to the news almost immediately. European stocks rallied after President Trump publicly walked back threats of force and dropped proposed tariffs, easing fears of an immediate transatlantic shock. The Pan-European Stocks Index jumped more than 1%, while Wall Street posted its strongest session in nearly 2 months as investors unwound worst-case trade in geopolitical scenarios. Currency and safe haven moves reinforced the sense of relief rather than confidence. The euro edged back toward $1.17, Denmark's krona had held steady, and gold retreated from record highs, signaling that investors trimmed hedges but did not abandon them entirely. Volatility gauges fell sharply and U.S. Treasuries caught a bid after yields had surged earlier in the week. Still, analysts caution that markets are reacting to tone, not closure. Reuters notes that investors remain wary of fully reversing defensive positions, viewing Trump's reversal as tactical rather than permanent. And the episode reinforced a familiar pattern here. Headline-driven swings followed by stabilization, as markets bet that economic fundamentals, interest rates, growth, and earnings will ultimately outweigh Greenland brinksmanship unless rhetoric escalates again. Now, despite the easing rhetoric, France is not convinced that this episode is over. Bloomberg reports that French officials are still pushing back against Trump's threats to impose massive tariffs on champagne, warning that iconic European exports are being turned into leverage in a broader geopolitical standoff. France's trade minister accused Washington of treating symbolic industries as hostages, arguing that threats against wine and spirits cross a line, even as tensions over Greenland appear to cool. Trump had floated tariffs of up to 200% on wines and champagne, a move that would directly hit one of France's most valuable and politically sensitive export sectors. The U.S. is the single most important market for French champagne, accounting for roughly €750 million a year and 1/5 of their total exports. French officials have stressed that even if broader tariff threats tied to Greenland have cooled, repeated warnings against alcohol exports are being taken seriously as a sign of how quickly economic tools could be redeployed. France has been among the strongest advocates for keeping retaliation firmly on the table, including the use of the EU's powerful anti-coercion instrument. But not all EU member states are prepared to escalate at the same pace, reflecting different economic exposures and political calculations. Now, as Europe refines its response, champagne has emerged as a potent symbol of how trade, Politics and prestige are now tightly entangled in the Greenland dispute. And Europe's standoff with Washington over Greenland is only intensifying a debate that was already brewing: whether the continent can still rely on the United States as its ultimate security guarantor. Now, at Davos, U.S. officials made clear that Europe should no longer assume unconditional American military backing. And for many European leaders, the Greenland episode has become less about the island itself and more about what it reveals: a structural vulnerability in Europe's defense posture. The problem here is fragmentation. Europe's military capabilities remain divided along national lines, with countries prioritizing domestic defense industries over interoperability. France largely buys French weapons. Germany buys German ones. And the result is a patchwork of systems that are costly, incompatible, and produced in small quantities. Europe manufactures roughly 50 main battle tanks a year. Russia produces more than 1,500. Financing is just as disjointed. Defense spending depends on each country's fiscal capacity and threat perception. Poland spends close to 5% of GDP on defense, while Spain spends closer to 2%. Germany can mobilize hundreds of billions in additional funding. France cannot. And the EU lacks a common borrowing mechanism for defense, meaning that rearmament remains slower, more expensive, and politically fraught than in rival powers. Greenland did not create these problems. However, it did expose them. And while leaders agree on the need for greater strategic autonomy, Bloomberg argues their actions lag far behind their rhetoric. Proposals for a coalition of willing states, including the UK, to jointly issue debt and coordinate defense procurement remain politically sensitive and unresolved. The result is an uncomfortable reality. Europe faces rising external threats and growing uncertainty about U.S. intentions, yet still lacks the institutional tools to respond quickly or cohesively. And while Western powers have been debating Greenland's future over supposed Russian and Chinese threats, Moscow has taken a strikingly relaxed posture. Russia has signaled it has no intention of intervening and little interest in stopping the United States from pursuing a deal. Speaking publicly on the issue for the first time, President Vladimir Putin said Greenland's ownership was of no concern to Moscow and suggested Washington and Denmark should resolve the matter between themselves. The remarks mark a notably casual posture from a country with deep strategic interest in the Arctic. Putin went further, criticizing Denmark's historical treatment of Greenlanders and floating, almost casually, that the island could be worth around $1 billion, invoking past precedents such as Russia's sale of Alaska to the United States. The comments were widely interpreted not as opposition to Trump's push, but as tacit acceptance of it. For Moscow, the Greenland dispute certainly has an upside. It deepens divisions between Washington and Europe, it distracts from the Ukraine, complicates NATO unity, and allows Russia to maintain its strong Arctic presence without confrontation. Russian officials have been careful not to antagonize Trump, who the Kremlin still sees as a potential interlocutor on broader geopolitical issues. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov echoed that tone, saying that Greenland is not a natural part of Denmark. The result is a striking alignment of interests here. While Europe scrambles to preserve unity and push back against U.S. pressure, Russia is content to watch from the sidelines, signaling neutrality, expressing mild sympathy for Trump's argument, and benefiting from a transatlantic rift that distracts from Moscow's own Arctic ambitions. And what I find most interesting about all of this is that, in the end, this was never really about Greenland itself, right? This was about leverage. Trump didn't actually try to buy Greenland in any meaningful or literal sense. What he was really doing was trying to reprice it, not in dollars, but in terms of influence, access, and control over strategically important terrain, critical minerals, shipping lanes, and long-term Arctic governance. And whether people like the approach or not, there's an uncomfortable truth here that the part kind of worked. He forced a conversation that nobody in Europe really wanted to have. He brought issues like Arctic security, mineral access, and NATO's long-term posture into the open. And he managed to extract concessions without ever formally challenging borders, and rewriting treaties or planting a flag. Now that tells you something important about how modern geopolitics is starting to function. Power today isn't just about who owns what, it's about who shapes the terms of engagement, who sets the agenda, and who makes other people uncomfortable enough to come to the table. Now, whether you see that as smart negotiating or reckless diplomacy probably depends on your politics. But what's harder to argue with is that it reflects a broader shift in how global influence is being exercised. This isn't a world that runs purely on agreements anymore. It runs on pressure, on leverage and on uncertainty. And once leaders discover that pressure works, they tend to keep using it, which is probably why this won't be the last time we see a standoff like this, where the headline sounds outrageous, tactics feel destabilizing, and yet the end result is a reshuffling of power that happens quietly without borders ever moving on a map. All right, joining me to talk about this story and others, of course, we have the man that connects the dots like no one else, Nolan Bowerly, and our Bitcoin educator and entrepreneur, Brandon Gentile. Guys, happy Thursday. Welcome to the show. Great to see you both. How are you?
Great to see you guys.
I'm enthusiastic.
Yeah, great to have you. So guys,
humanity, man.
I love your optimism, Nolan. You're really the sunshine of my mornings, my man. So let's start with you. First beats on this. We heard Trump talk about Greenland at Davos. What did you hear? Was there anything that surprised you? What are your first thoughts?
Pure Trump theater again. Trump doing what he does best, moving people's perceptions much faster than people even realize. I mean, this is a startup nation. People think about Trump when he's operating at this capacity. You know, you hear about Mount Rushmore and you hear about all these things. He's really showing he's kind of a foundational character, almost like a founding father when it comes to this stuff. And now I use the word founding loosely because it looks more like a startup. I even think we heard Scott Bessent say that yesterday, that he's operating at the pace of a Silicon Valley startup. And so when I think of founder, you know, you can go back to the George Washington version of a founder, but there's a new type of connotation to founder that we have, and that's really the Silicon Valley version. So this is like a refounding type element. And I do believe, I heard in your notes, you said that there's no border changing. That's not confirmed. I think there will be border changes. I think you're going to see Greenland itself get carved up. It might not be uniform. And then when it goes back to that pioneering foundational mindset, that's really what I think Trump is betting on. It's just about laying track now. When you come to these areas that no one inhabits and that are unpopulated, the way you assert sovereignty is literally building infrastructure. You build roads, you build ports, you build all that stuff. So once you have a toehold in there, it becomes a race. We're going to talk about Canada in a second, but that's really always been the history of Canada. Was the Civil War ended and the London bankers said, no, we're not going to put any money there anymore because the Grand Army of the Republic is just going to plunder it. They're too strong. We can't fight them a third time. So everything became a race then to build out the private infrastructure. We knew that Chicago was becoming a hub of rail in that period, and it was going to wherever there was stuff to bring it into the American heartland, bring it into the infrastructure that was there with the Mississippi and the beginning of the rail lines. Canada was created to stop that natural commercial private flow of building and create this east-west infrastructure, this banking financed infrastructure. So in that case, it was a race to build. Canada found a model that allowed them to be a country for these 100 and whatever years. But now that same fight, the same one that British abdicated after the Civil War, is coming to Greenland. And it will be a race in terms of development. It's going to be a race to build stuff. If we don't build anything there in America, it won't be American. But if they build it, it will all be American.
And Brandon, what were your initial beats on Trump's speak at Davos? I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah, I mean, and Nolan's talked about this for a long time, you know, for a number of years. And I'm still shocked that we're 8-10 years into Trump, you know, in the major, I guess, worldwide spotlight in the global geopolitical realm, and that people still don't get it and still living in this cognitive dissonance constantly with him. You know, it's deeds, not words. He's constantly reframing things and causing all kinds of chaos and havoc, like Nolan mentioned. And it's kind of like if anyone's seen Frozen 2, or the people that lived up north, and they were in this fog, in this haze, and you couldn't see what was going on. And it's like being in a whiteout, and that's what he creates. And then he's working behind the scenes while everyone's distracted. I mean, the last couple of weeks, it's wild because you watch some of the biggest geopolitical experts in the world, Colonel Larry Wilkerson, Colonel Douglas McGregor, Judge Napolitano, Jeffrey Sachs. I mean, and then you go down the list, Candace Owens of the world, The Blaze, Glenn Beck, the Young Turks. You go down the list, Gerald Celente, Larry Johnson, all of them engaging in massive cognitive dissonance and just pontificating, mind reading, and they still do not get it. Now, to Nolan's point, I think the person that I've seen now after watching a couple dozen people, maybe 2 or 3, 4 dozen people over the last couple of weeks between Venezuela, Greenland, Davos, what's happening is probably Glenn Beck, to be totally honest. And it was basically what Nolan just outlined. He's smoking out. It seems like he's smoking out allies left and right, and it's kind of how he operates. But he's smoking out. You look at Carney, which we're going to talk about in a second, obviously in Canada. But he's smoking his allies out and smoking the enemies out, and that's what he does. And so to me, it's a lot of this pontificating and cognitive dissonance, and so I think that this is what's going to play out. And they learned from the first administration the speed. Again, Nolan kind of briefly touched on this too. The speed, working at a startup level, this gives the media, almost the legacy world, almost no time to react to what's happening, because then the next thing's happening. And they learned that from this process of, hey, if we sit here and stew on something for a month or two, we're dead in the tracks. We're dead to rights, and they're going to jump all over it. And now the speed at which they move doesn't allow the system to catch up.
Very interesting, guys. And you both mentioned something about the speed, and I want to relay that back to something that Trump said in his speech. At one point during his time at the forum, he mentioned something about something along the lines of, like, dictators aren't that bad. Like, sometimes there's a place for dictatorship, right? And I kind of wonder if maybe he meant it more in that terms. Trump is a businessman first and foremost, right? And if you're the head of a business, you can move fast, you can break things, and you don't have to worry about all the bureaucracy. So, Nolan, my question for you is, do you think that's maybe what Trump kind of meant, kind of having that power to move fast like a dictator or the owner of a business? Is that really what he would have meant by that statement? I'd love to get your thoughts. Nolan, we can't hear you. Looks like we lost audio on Nolan here real quick.
No, I got it. There it is. Yeah. It looks like it's exactly that. Yeah. He's pacing and leading, right? That's what he does to persuade. He sort of lets you know where things are headed, and definitely puts ideas in your mind. He definitely is a few steps ahead and talking about stuff that are a few steps ahead. He's been talking about the efficiency, let's say, of these folks for a long time, of dictatorships. But it's the reaction, right? I've said this before. We had Justin Trudeau say it explicitly in Canada. He explicitly said in an interview when he was trying to become prime minister the first time, he said, I admire, more than any other country, he said, I admire China's, his exact words were, basic dictatorship. And it was because indeed they could deliver results very quickly. Now, of course, when Justin Trudeau said it, everyone said, oh, that's really nice. Yeah, he's like his dad. He's just friends with China. And when Trump says it, everyone lights themselves on fire and decides it's the end of the world and all that stuff. Trump is definitely more a fan of getting along with the dictators that exist in the world, because the posturing just does nothing, right? You heard him when he was talking about the Board of Peace. It was pure Trump theater this morning, where he says, some of you are popular in your countries, some of you are not so popular. That's the way it goes, right? And kind of laughing at it and saying things that no leader would say normally. But it's just like what we heard from Trump with Mamdani a few weeks ago. Remember when Trump was with Mamdani, and it was some of the great Trump theater of all time, when they're like, but Mr. Mamdani, what are you going to do? Are you still going to call him a dictator? And Mamdani starts trying to do the political thing, and Trump said, no. Just go with it. Don't, it's too hard to explain. Just go with it. And so, that's Trump.
Yeah, and another big takeaway from this, I think, is that we heard Trump come out and verbalize, putting a lot of people to ease, that there's not going to be any physical confrontations, with this Greenland episode. And from your perspective, they would seemingly have avoided a confrontation here, which is great, but it does kind of beg the question, at what cost? So, Brandon, my question for you is, when you have countries saying yes to Trump's demands under pressure like this, could that show up later in ways maybe they didn't anticipate? Could this be a bit of a slippery slope for them? You say yes to Trump once, next time he pushes a little further. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I truly believe that a lot of all the textbooks, all the talking heads, a lot of people I just mentioned a minute ago, they live in this old world. They live in the legacy world. That world really doesn't exist anymore. How many times we've heard the rules-based order, international order, all these things that have happened, and these frames, they're just the wrong way to be looking about what's happening and what's going forward. I mean, we have Bitcoin here, obviously. Like the world is shifting so rapidly. It's almost like most of the society is so far behind, and Trump might be just keeping up with it. And it's not to sit here and, for Nolan and I and Hank to pump Trump's tires necessarily. It's just we're talking about startup world, founder world, and that's a select few people that are in that world that are visionary, that are pulling society along. And because that's kind of what society does. The masses try to stay comfortable. And so you have this world where you have a number of people, and again, you go back to Genghis Khan, all these different people of the world, they pushed society forward, whether you thought it was good, bad, indifferent, or whatever it was. But this is what happens. You have a few strong men pushing world or pulling the world forward, and the masses kind of sit back. Moses did it with leading the people out of Egypt, right? You can go, there's thousands of examples throughout history. So at the end of the day, is there going to be a backlash to this eventually or at some point? There could be, I guess, but people say the rules-based order, international order, like, well, we don't trust America anymore, this and that and the other thing. But we're in a multipolar world. We're in a world where these guys are trying to onshore stuff or reshore stuff and bring things back and make things more secure. Because at the end of the day, Trump is the president of the United States. So his job is to just protect the United States of America. And we can argue about, going to Venezuela or Greenland. Are these good things? Is that really protecting America? That's where I guess the argument kind of starts, and you can kind of go play with that. But his job is to focus on America. And for a long time, the leaders of the world were focusing on everyone else but America. And the ex-president was focusing on a lot of things other than America. So now we have someone that's doing that, and it's very radical to people at Davos. It's very radical to just like the legacy crowd, and it's very radical to just the average person. So I think that it's just a new world. I don't think there's necessarily going to be pushback, because again, right now we still have 13 aircraft carriers as of now, and hopefully a lot of drones, as Nolan said. One will go down maybe at some point, but yeah, I think it's a new world, and people just haven't shifted to this new world yet.
Yeah, it's Trump's new world, and I think we're all just living in it right now. I want to move on to our next story that also took place in Davos with President Trump, as he's making headlines again, but for this time by telling Canada it should be grateful for what he called the freebies it receives from the United States. Trump aimed his comments directly at Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, saying he had watched Carney's recent speech and thought it showed a lack of appreciation for America. Trump told the Davos audience that Canada lives because of the United States, and warned Carney to remember that when speaking publicly. Carney's speech, which Trump was responding to, took a very different tone. The Canadian leader argued that the world is entering a period of geopolitical rupture where old rules and alliances are weakening. He said middle powers need to work together more closely as larger countries increasingly act alone. Without naming Trump directly, Carney warned that nostalgia is not a strategy and said nations not at the table risk ending up on the menu. Now, Trump, meanwhile, used his Davos appearance to restate his more transactional view of alliances. He framed U.S. relationships as deals where America provides security and economic advantages that others often take for granted. This back and forth adds to growing tension between the U.S. and Canada during Trump's second term. He has previously questioned the value of the USMCA trade deal, suggested the U.S. does not need Canadian products, and pushed allies for tougher concessions. Canadian officials avoided directly responding to the latest remarks. However, leaders in Ottawa have increasingly emphasized the need to diversify trade beyond reliance on the United States. Ontario Premier Doug Ford called Trump's comments disappointing but typical, warning that repeated public attacks on allies can make the global system more unstable. For viewers at home, this matters because the U.S. and Canada have one of the largest trade relationships on the planet. And when leaders start publicly reframing that relationship as transactional instead of cooperative, it can affect everything from supply chains to consumer prices to long-term diplomatic trust. And once that trust erodes, it's hard to rebuild. We're bringing the guys back. Nolan, I want to start with you. You got some additional skin in this game. What are your remarks about Trump and Canada should be grateful for all the freebies that we give them? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely true. Canada has benefited. The way to understand Canada is a hot dog salesman outside of an NFL football stadium. And if you're a hot dog stand outside of an NFL football stadium, you better be damn happy when it's Sunday and the NFL is in town and it's game day, because you sell a lot of hot dogs when it's game day. Canada was born in a perpetual Sunday. Every day was Sunday. Every day was game day. We had the stadium filled the whole time, and Canada was able to use this geographic proximity and cultural proximity to the United States to build a very successful country, for sure. It did great for many, many years. Now, I heard Carney's speech as well. Carney went deep into the Havel book, The Power of the Powerless. It was all so weighted. It was all so beautiful. Any Harvard speechwriter would have said, greatest speech. I heard many people say, greatest speech in the world. But it was all fake. Mark Carney is the person who told the nation to be okay with martial law being declared on the protesters because the horn honking was too loud. So he threw out the entire Canadian banking sector by writing an op-ed saying, follow the money to stop the protests. He actually called for tanks to be unleashed on Canadian citizens during the truckers' protest in 2022 while he was the governor of a foreign country, the governor of the Bank of England. And so he decided to come to Canada at that time. I used to work with the guy, so I've known him for a long time. So he comes back to Canada and says, no, guys, I got it all figured out for the truckers. Just martial law, obviously, go after all the money. They're not allowed giving $20 to people protesting. So the same guy who lectured everyone on stage about the power of the powerless is the guy who said to people giving $20 to truckers, sick fucking martial law on them. That's the guy we're talking about here. Trump chose him to be the Prime Minister of Canada on purpose. Trump influenced the elections in Canada in April or May. Go back to last year when Greenland first started. The second word out of Trump's mouth after was 51st state Canada. And you can draw a direct line to Trump getting involved. That created the conditions to get rid of Trudeau, because Trudeau, of course, flies down to meet Trump when Trump is president-elect over a year ago. Trump says, what happens if we change the trade deal? And Trudeau goes, well, Canada will cease to exist. And so Trump goes, what? What are you talking about? Canada can't exist with a trade deal changed. And so Trump said, you shouldn't even be a country if that's the case. If you need us to make you a country, then you're not a country. So Mark Carney rode in on that failure by Trudeau, and he ran the election. Trump chose him to be prime minister. Trump did not side with the conservatives, not because of the political thing. It's just Trump again. One of the things Trump does so well for persuasion is the delta between how he treats you if you're his friend and how he treats you if you're his enemy is so great that people understand. You look at the NATO and you look at whatever Root, the guy running the NATO, he got the gist of that, right? He was like, no, we're great. You're daddy, right? He called him daddy. So the conservatives in Canada did a political calculation. They said Trump isn't popular. We're going to go with the not Trump thing. And so Trump chose his own colleague in Canada. I believe, I can't mind read Trump. I believe he did it because with Carney, you can actually precipitate the end of Canada. And Carney and what he's doing right now with this fight with America, with that feckless, weak speech, he ran away after he came back home. You know, this is Carney at his most powerful. He is the quintessential Davos man. He was called the quintessential Davos man on stage this year. So he had to slink away when Trump was speaking and go back to Canada. Now he's the quintessential Davos man because they're not into the domestic politics. They're not into the details, just like they're not into the details of American politics. It's much more global and kind of superficial when it comes to domestic policy. He went home, and even back home on the media that he pays for, that is completely state sponsored, they're saying, what about just at least talking with Trump and getting a deal? So my prediction remains he lost a bunch of the Arctic. The deal that Trump signed with NATO is for the Arctic. And the same thing that I said about actually colonizing and building roads, Canada's never done that. Canada's claims to all the northernmost islands are not recognized by the rest of the world. Russia doesn't recognize it. China doesn't recognize it. They all still think that it is no man's land that can be claimed by anyone willing to build there. So it looks like NATO is going to give permission to the United States to start coming in that Arctic part, all the different islands that are up there. And indeed, I predict you'll see the referendum in Alberta this year, and Canada will indeed be broken apart, and America might get some of it, but the federation that is Canada will see Mark Carney as the last prime minister in that country. Greenland story over, Canada next. 51st state, 52nd state, 53rd state. Canada is divisible, so you're not going to get one state out of it. You're going to get multiple. Not all of it will join the United States. Parts of it can live on its own, but Canada will not survive. Sovereign individual first predicted it in the 1990s. It is the most fiat of countries. It exists because of these institutions. It was not created by the founding fathers like the United States. It was created for want of banking. And Mark Carney is in charge of the banking, and it was the banking that is going to go to shit. And so I do predict an attack on Canadian banks, an attack on the Canadian dollar, and a loss of fiat sovereignty in the part of Canada is in the works.
Well, it sounds like we certainly have some big changes underway. And previously, Brandon, you mentioned about this kind of new world order, right? And we're hearing the president of the United States kind of talking about alliances the way Trump is here, but they're more like business deals than like long-term partnerships. Is that part of that new world order where everything is going to be more business rather than cooperation? Or could you expand on that a little bit? I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, and the freest, that's why we're all here, right? Because of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the highest form of communication, or I should say money, right? Immutable, trustless money, where none of us have to trust Mark Carney, none of us have to trust what Donald Trump is doing, what any of these guys at the top are doing, and that's the freest expression out of these feedback loops of I'm purchasing this, you're purchasing that, we're doing these things around the world. That gives us signals to society as to what's happening, and so that is part of this world order. And I'm not going to try to rehash everything Nolan said, because he's probably one of the best experts at all this with Canada, what's happening. I mean, the British Crown seemingly, it makes sense, right? They were never happy once they lost the war to America, and Canada. All this has kind of come as a product of this. It seems like Canada is this test bed, this proxy, and Nolan obviously has talked about this before. You look at Alberta, what's happening there, Quebec for a long time. The time has come, and all things run their course, and it feels like Trump is trying to accelerate the fall. And globalists are trying to do their thing and collapse it into the system they want. You can see that Davos is kind of plain as day. And then Trump, it seems, again, mind reading a little bit, but it seems like he's trying to accelerate the fall into another direction. And so the grand chessboard into these, again, the multipolar world, the island of the Western hemispheres over here, and then what's going on in the East. So that's what it seems like from over here, obviously. In the new world, like you said, Hank, is this digital world, sovereignty, local, freedom cities, citadels, like rebuilding this new world, because it is a new world. That the technology, everything is so different than we've ever had before. So it makes sense. And remember, at the end of the day, Trump is one of the few people that I've ever seen politically, before he even got into politics. He's never swayed, at least to my knowledge, he's never swayed on really any of what he's ever talked about. He's been talking about China since what, Nolan? The 70s, 80s. He's been constant. Yeah. I don't want endless wars. I don't want these bad trade deals with China, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you see every other politician, all these people going back and forth and swaying on their opinions. He's one of the few, maybe one of the only ones that I've ever seen in my life that has not gone back on these things. So he going back to the beginning, what we were saying, he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do. I just think, again, this old world order is not used to it, doesn't like it, and it wasn't part of the design. It's again, it's the Back to the Future. It's this other parallel universe that's happening. The time-space continuum has ruptured, and they're just freaking out. They're like, what in the world is happening? And here we are.
And I want to add one other.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I want to add one other prediction to this, because we saw Scott Bessent having a great time at Davos as well. Scott Bessent's the Patrick Bateman 2.0 speech. I don't know if you've seen it yet, Hank. It's quite good. Talking about Gavin Newsom being there. It's very strong, very strong. But listening to what he was threatening Gavin Newsom with, which was the audits. So 2026, my prediction for 2025 was the subordination of the Federal Reserve to the Treasury. I'm going to make another prediction that I've been reiterating on my show every morning about 2026 when it comes to Bessent, and that's the word audit is going to be the most important concept that we have for the whole year. Now, globally, you can see it with the AI, right? You're going to start to see like sourcing of AI and provenance. Like that's just one form of chain of custody audit. So that's just a part of it. But specifically to Bessent, he's going to go and he threatened California with the Minnesota type investigations, and he's bringing the fraud stuff sort of national. The truth is, a lot of that fraud stuff remains through Canadian banks. Canadian banks have been integrated in American corruption from the very beginning. Go back to what I said about the reason why the London bankers had to get rid of Canada at the origins of Canada. Canada was created just after the Civil War for that reason. What happened was the reason why the northernmost battle of the Civil War was in St. Albans, Vermont, the closest Walmart to my house, was because the British were funding the Confederates. The British have been funding, using their financial mechanisms, all kinds of mischief and trouble in America for a long time. They were the Confederate Army bankers. The Confederate Army army were able to invade from the north, given the Canadian staging position. With what Carney did with China last week, and with what I believe a lot of these investigations into financial corruption in America mean, when you get into the US aid and the NGOs and everything that went on with there, it's all going to lead back to Canada. Canada is infested with propaganda creators, with narrative supply chain folks who have been funded by the looting of the American system. So there's a whole nother reason out there related to banking and audits and everything in Minnesota and California and Virginia and wherever else these investigations go. They're going to head inevitably back to Canada, and Canada is part of the problem when it comes to these bank cartels.
Oh boy, that's a mouthful, but we appreciate breaking all that down for us. We love your predictions, Nolan, so thank you for sharing that with us. And we're going to go to our Bitcoin story of the morning. So guys, let's roll the stinger and get into it. The price of Bitcoin is currently sitting at $88,000 this morning, and that brings us to our Bitcoin story of the hour. As even with Bitcoin reaching record prices in the past year, there are fewer people that seem to be talking about it. And new data shows that online chatter about Bitcoin dropped sharply in 2025, even as the asset climbed to new all-time highs. Figures shared by longtime Bitcoin advocate Jameson Lopp show that posts on X containing the word Bitcoin fell about 32% year over year. Now that brings the total to roughly 96 million posts, which sounds huge but is significantly lower than before. Google Trends data tells a similar story. Search interest spiked after Donald Trump's election victory in late 2024, then steadily cooled throughout 2025. That decline continued even when Bitcoin surged past $120,000 and later retouched around $126,000. Now, it also held steady after a sharp October crash wiped out roughly $19 billion in leveraged crypto positions. Or in other words, massive price moves did not bring the usual wave of curiosity or hype. That is unusual for an asset historically driven by attention cycles. Now, while retail interest cooled, some of Bitcoin's most visible advocates stayed very much active online. Michael Saylor posted more than 1,200 times about Bitcoin in 2025, mostly with neutral or positive sentiment. Blockstream CEO Adam Back and Human Rights Foundation strategist Alex Gladstein also remained frequent posters, especially during moments of market stress. Now, despite this, sentiment indicators like the Crypto Fear and Greed Index stayed largely in the fear territory into early of 2026. That suggests that caution still dominates investor psychology, even as prices continue to rise. Now, for those of you watching at home, this matters because attention is often what fuels bubbles and crashes. Lower hype can mean fewer reckless bets, less leverage, and more mature market structure. It could also mean that Bitcoin is shifting from a spectacle to a financial tool. Quiet markets are not always weak markets. Sometimes they are simply growing up. All right, guys, I want to talk about this one. First, Brandon, this is for you. What do you make of this? We've seen Bitcoin have what many would consider a banner year last year, yet sentiment seems to be at an all-time low. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? What are your thoughts?
These things just take longer than we all think they're going to. I mean, I remember interviewing Pierre Rochard like a year or so ago, and he was like, yeah, in 2012, I got in, right? And I'm exuberant. Everyone's going to get this. It's going to be amazing. We're all going to grok Bitcoin. And here we are 15 years later, 14 years later, whatever it is. And it takes time. And I think one of the big telling things, in my opinion, the mind op emanates from the state against Bitcoin. Obviously, it makes sense. Why wouldn't it? But the global media, the ability to propagandize the people, which we just talked about it a minute ago with Canada, it's the same thing with Bitcoin. You have energy usage, all these things that were, the FUD against Bitcoin is going to boil oceans. All these things were so bad. And, we just had this endless inundation of propaganda against Bitcoin. And then cutscene, all of a sudden, the last year or two, you hear very little about energy usage of Bitcoin. Why is that? Well, it's because AI is here now. So now energy usage is good, uses much more than Bitcoin, and we need all these data centers, we need all this, but it's good because AI is controllable. They think the globalists think that they're going to be able to control the whole world with it. And again, going back to the Davos and the Yuval Harari, all these different people talking about it over the years, your God is the cloud, all this stuff. So all of it makes sense, all of it lines up. But at the end of the day, part of it too is that greed runs Wall Street. So, Wall Street obviously is in. you have to be careful that, losing narrative over time. Obviously, it's a protocol outside the system, so you don't want people to believe that's just another asset inside this US dollar system. So there's, some things, education that we all do here, and we have to continue doing that. But the greed runs Wall Street, so they want cheap Bitcoin as well. They want their fees and the ETFs. They want cheap Bitcoin. I believe the same thing happened in the 90s as well with the internet boom. The average guy got in, and then Wall Street was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And then they got the little guy out. We know what happened, the dot-com crash, all this stuff, right? So this has happened before. It's the same kind of thing playing out over again. And you have, again, like Brian Armstrong was just fighting with the XRP guy, I believe, fighting in Davos with one of the, was it the German central banker? I can't remember who it was
French.
now, but French. Yeah, thank you. And so they're fighting with him, and the guy's sitting there telling the central banker, well, our trust comes from that we're independent, So, I mean, no one believes this charade anymore. Anyone over 40, 45 years old doesn't believe a single word that's going on. But again, going back to your point, Hank, it just takes time for people to see what's going on in the younger generation. Granted, the younger generation doesn't have a ton of wealth right now. They're getting into positions of power. They're gaining slowly more wealth over time. And as we know, science progresses one funeral at a time. And that's this process we are going through right now.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. Nolan, right now, sentiment is very low. We're only 30% away from all-time highs that we saw a few months ago. What's your beat on this situation currently?
Yeah, it's the all-time high is not really the measurement. It's the momentum. It's the thrust, and there's no thrust. There's no momentum. There's no growth. We've seen it, even in a media company like us, we can see the price in the numbers. So I could say, YouTube or Twitter is, I think we saw that they were shadow banning or throttling or whatever. I could say that, but I don't think it's that, because I see it across all platforms. It's across all of them. Part of the reason I think Bitcoin is psychological. The psychological narrative of this cycle was state adoption. It was US state adoption, typical of Trump. He sort of entered the room, and all of the oxygen sort of came with the way he saw it, the way he did it. And so that's a normal thing. What we have now, though, is his introduction to this debasement trade sucked in. And I think this is what Brandon was kind of talking about. It sucked Wall Street in. So Wall Street became a huge counterparty in this. And we weren't ready for that in many ways. I wasn't in particular. And what we saw was them manipulate the market at levels that I didn't understand were possible. And as much as I said, they're going to be manipulating the market, they were rattling that cage like crazy, and it's been tough for a lot of people. I think this has been, weirdly, one of the hardest years I've ever seen in Bitcoin in my life. And despite the all-time high prices, just getting things done, like growing a media company, growing an exchange, have been as hard as it was when Bitcoin was in the hundreds of dollars. And so to me, it's the growth that hasn't been there. The enthusiastic thing is we've seen the other side of the trade play out a lot in 2025, which is the sell dollars trade. The reason why you would move to Bitcoin is because the fiat system is collapsing. So, but that's a little too esoteric for people. I'm buying Bitcoin is hot because Bessent is auditing the Fed, and Trump is slapping the back of the Fed Reserve chair, and no one really, it's too complicated. So indeed, I think when the next narrative crystallizes, which I can see already as energy finance, it's the building of the systems. It's Trump saying to the AI guys, go build. And it's the fusion of these potential Bitcoin citadels getting off the mark. The proto citadels are there, and that's where the signal is in Bitcoin right now. The signal is in PubKey. The signal is in Bitcoin Park. The signal is in Presidio. The signal is in Roxom, Bitcoin denominated markets. That is the signal. But the market, this Bitcoin, offshoot, this Bitcoin breakaway civilization that we're building is only in its proto form. The next narrative is this breakaway system. The narrative that Trump gave us was great for last year. It already spent itself. And the next one is the iteration that will help push it forward. It is the Freedom Cities. It is Microsoft, everybody building a city in Greenland. Remember, Trump has already hinted that he's got Greenland already pegged with corporate sponsors that are going to move there. So, in one time it was religious groups that went and founded America. They would break away from European countries and go and make Maryland, and they went and made the Puritans, and all these breakaway religious groups went out. Bitcoiners are a kind of breakaway religious group, and it'll be that narrative, I think, that we fall into next. That's the extreme version of the Bitcoin Treasury Company.
Yeah, as we know, Bitcoin is, all about the narratives. We saw a lot last year, but with it didn't come some of the hype we would have figured. And Brandon, I want to finish with you really quick, and then we got to get rolling here. Bitcoin is kind of traded sideways. We've seen kind of since October. It's gotten a little boring. But I kind of wonder, do you think that might actually be a sign of success in Bitcoin, that it maybe is getting a little boring? Isn't that what kind of a lot of people have been waiting for? Does that mean maybe we're entering this new maturation phase of Bitcoin? I'd love to get your take before we wrap.
It's a small nascent asset class, and still, relatively speaking. So it's something that, again, it's going to play out over time, obviously. And yes, people want maturation. That's going to happen over time. But in reality, we want people to be educated and to see the light at the end of the day, right? Bitcoin, like Nolan just said, it's a kind of cultural, spiritual, almost religious movement, because we want people to see the light. We want people to see the truth. At the end of the day, most humans aren't moved by reason. Thomas Paine wrote about this in Common Sense. Yeah. That was a precursor to the Revolutionary War. And he time is the catalyst. It's not reason. And so when people are emotional, intelligence goes down, and we find ourselves in a pot that's constantly being stoked because of fiat, the ability for the people above us to be stoking that pot with what's going on in Minnesota and around the world, and endless news coverage 24/7. Well, that keeps people's energy or their emotions up high, and the intelligence comes down on a global basis. So you have this world where we know, though, guaranteed the governments have to print currency ad infinitum. It's a debt-based system, so Bitcoin will continue going up in those dollar-denominated or fiat-denominated currencies forever. So that is guaranteed. It is inevitable, but it just takes longer than we think because of this emotional state we find ourselves in. But we know black swans are coming. All these things are coming. You joked with Nolan over time too. Trudeau is one of the greatest orange pillars of all time. I think Nolan might have been one of the first ones to ever say that, because he did. He locked people down. He froze their bank accounts. And guess what? A lot of people woke up right away. Well, that's coming again and again and again. And then eventually you look, it's 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, the demographic has shifted. All these stupid events have happened. And guess what? We have the Bitcoin standard.
Yeah, and I'll add one point to that, because you reminded me, it wasn't just the manipulation by Wall Street. It was my prediction of when Bitcoin would enter the bull market was when Trump subordinated the Federal Reserve, because he needed their political print, which they only gave to Janet Yellen and Biden because they had become politicized. It's why I predicted the subordination of the Federal Reserve was going to be so important in the first year, because Trump wants control of that print to trigger the debasement trade, and that most people will be waiting in Bitcoin for that moment, and we're still not there. Trump's doing his best to get rid of Powell, that's for sure. I don't know if you could do more than what Trump's done, so we can't really fault him on that. The Trump theater of the building audit was one of the funniest things in the history of communications. So it was too funny, right? Watching with the glasses and everything. So once the print comes, that is where I think Bitcoin, of course, it's been in tandem with prints from the Federal Reserve from the very start, and that shouldn't change while the system is in the configuration that it's in.
Yeah, when the print comes, but we, here at Roxom, of course, we don't want people to be reactionary. We want them to be proactive, and we're really thankful we have two stewards of the space like both of you that are joining us and helping explain to everybody why this is such an important thing for them to be paying attention to now. Brandon, you're one of my personal favorite Bitcoin educators on the web. So real quick, I'm sure there are people in the audience that are big fans of you now, if they weren't already. What's the best place they can go to check out all of the great things you're talking about on your channel and on your X account?
Just Brandon_Gentili. It's my first and last name underscore in between there on all the platforms, YouTube, Twitter, Nostr, everything. So appreciate you guys.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks for joining us, Brandon. Always a pleasure when we have you on. And Nolan, it's my treat to get to have you 3 days a week. So thank you so much for your time today. And everybody at home, make sure you're tuning into Nolan's show before RoxomTV News every morning. The Great Awakening, it's amazing. So really happy to have both you guys in the show at the same time today. It's been double trouble, and I'm always here for it. So thanks for joining us. And we'll see you guys next time. Enjoy the rest of your week, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks a ton, Hank. See you next week, man.
See you next week, bud. Thanks, guys. Cheers. All right, we're taking a quick break here at Roxom TV News, but when we're back, we're going to be going into our second hour of today's top stories, and we're going to be joined by not one, but two special guests to break it all down. So stay tuned. More Roxom TV News coming your way right after this quick break. Welcome back to Roxom TV News. Now, before we get into the second hour of today's show, here's a quick recap of the top stories from our first hour. President Trump is backing away from threats of force and tariffs and instead floating a framework deal with NATO. When we then looked at France's pushback, where officials warn that Trump's threats of massive champagne tariffs are still on the table, even if the Greenland drama cools. And what used to be a luxury export is now a geopolitical bargaining chip. Now, joining us for the second hour of today's show, the most patriotic man in Bitcoin, Walker America. Walker, welcome back to the program. Always a treat having you. How are you?
Doing fantastic, Hank. Good to be back as always. Always appreciate the warm introductions as well. Really makes my day.
Oh, you make my day, friend. So we're super happy to have you here. You and I have got a lot to talk about. There was another train crash in Spain. I think that's like the fourth one in the last couple of weeks, which was pretty wild. There is a warning that aliens, literal aliens, could trigger a global financial meltdown. Very pumped to talk with you about that. But first, we're going to start with the news on Ghislaine Maxwell, who is set to testify on the Epstein case. So guys, let's roll the stinger so Walker and I can get into it. The top story of our second hour is unfolding in Washington, D.C., where lawmakers are reopening some of the most disturbing unanswered questions surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein case. Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime associate who is currently serving a 20-year federal prison sentence, has agreed to testify under oath before the U.S. House Oversight Committee. Now, committee chairman James Comer says Maxwell will give a virtual deposition on February 9th as part of a broader investigation into how Epstein's abuse network operated for so long without being stopped. Lawmakers are also examining how federal agencies handled related files after Epstein's death and why critical information may not have surfaced sooner. Maxwell was convicted in 2021 of recruiting and trafficking teenage girls for Epstein's sexual abuse. Her legal team has reportedly said she would likely invoke her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination unless she is granted immunity. They have also warned that testifying from prison without legal protections could expose her to additional charges. Congress cannot force her to waive those rights, which means there is real uncertainty about how much she will actually answer. And this testimony comes amid growing bipartisan frustration over how slowly and partially Epstein-related records have been released by the Justice Department. Critics say many documents remain heavily redacted and that transparency has been limited. The Oversight Committee has also voted to hold former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in contempt of Congress for refusing to comply with subpoenas tied to the same investigation. That move has sharply escalated the political stakes surrounding the case. If Maxwell does speak substantively, her testimony could reopen questions about who knew what inside government agencies, how Epstein avoided serious consequences for years, and whether powerful figures received preferential treatment. At the same time, her lawyers insist that without immunity, she may decline to answer many, if not most, of those sensitive questions. And that sets up a high-profile and potentially tense showdown between Congress and one of the most central figures in the Epstein scandal. For those of you watching at home, this matters because this case is not only about individual crimes, but about whether systems meant to protect vulnerable people actually work. When powerful networks operate in the shadows for years, public trust in institutions erodes, and once that trust is gone, restoring it becomes far more difficult than breaking it in the first place. All right, we're bringing Walker back. Walker, Ghislaine Maxwell may be testifying about the Epstein files. Do you think we're going to get any actual info here? What's your initial beat on this?
You know, Hank, I'm not getting my hopes up too much. I think that this has been a theme in this ongoing and just horrific saga in which, it's a lot of people forget, they focus on the politicians and everything, but the ungodly amount of victims in this case that have been used for political blackmail and just been, basically abused as pawns is truly horrific. But as it relates to Ghislaine Maxwell, I mean, I would hope that she would perhaps find a conscience. I don't know if she has one necessarily, probably not, given all the horrific things that she's done for Jeffrey Epstein and to enable that blackmail empire. But ultimately, I'm just not getting my hopes up with this, because if there's one thing that we've seen with this whole Epstein saga, it's that, if you think something, nothing ever happens, and anything that happens tends to be heavily redacted. And probably if she goes and starts to speak out, well, I'm just going to say, don't let Hillary Clinton anywhere near that jail cell, because we don't want her to Epstein herself, right? But this is just ultimately, I think this is becoming just a bit of an embarrassment overall. It's becoming clear. The one good thing, if I can find one silver lining about this whole saga, amidst all of the horrendous things that happened and the people that were abused, it's that this is kind of a mask off moment, I think, where people are realizing how deep, how insidious the corruption is at so many levels of government, how much both national, foreign and domestic intelligence agencies have really used these sorts of blackmailing techniques and these pawns to be able to really exert influence over how our political structure functions. And ultimately, I hope that more and more people, as we continue to not get any real information about Epstein, not get any real lists of the people he was working with, although we know a lot of the suspects, just alleged, of course, wink, wink. But I think that more and more people are going to realize that, wow, this system is so horrifically broken. It's so horrendously corrupt. Nothing's going to fix this, and the system certainly isn't going to fix itself, because the people that are supposed to be in charge of bringing this information to light, well, a lot of them may be implicated, and a lot of the people that they work for may be implicated. So, maybe we see some actual movement here. Maybe she, grows a conscience out of nowhere and decides to come clean about the whole thing. I highly doubt it, but hey, let's see. I'd love to be proven wrong.
Yeah, no, I think we're all probably in that same boat. She hasn't said much to date, so why would we expect anything different now, unless maybe she is granted some kind of immunity? But even then, you had that 119-page thing that was completely redacted, right? So my question is, do you think we're ever actually going to get real answers to this? Because this seems to go to the big, dark web channels of power, and there's so many people that I'm sure are still in play with this, that are big, powerful people. I just don't see this ever really getting resolved. And, the current president may or may not be part of this whole thing. Do you think we'll ever actually see the answers that all of us are eagerly anticipating? Or at this point, do you think that's probably a foregone conclusion that will likely never happen?
I highly doubt that any substantive new information comes out through official channels. My biggest hope is that we have an Edward Snowden type situation where, somebody on the inside is a whistleblower and they leak all this information, a WikiLeaks type situation where some brave journalists like Julian, we need somebody like Julian Assange who's willing to publish this information if it's made public and put it all out there. Because ultimately, that, even if this information were to potentially see the light of day, you'd probably see a lot of media suppression about it. Now, that's a lot more difficult in an age of decentralized media, of independent media. However, I really think that if we're going to get any real information out of all this, it's going to come from somebody on the inside who decides to do the right thing and leak this information out there. I'm not suggesting that anyone should do that, of course. That could probably somehow get me in hot water. But if someone were to do that, I would think that would be a very positive thing. Ultimately, what have the people in power said about this when it's been debated throughout the halls of Congress? The people who have said, oh, well, it could be a destabilizing function. It's like, well, why would it be destabilizing? Why would it be politically dangerous to release this? Well, because people at the highest levels of our government and of, across not just the U.S., but across the world, primarily focused in the U.S., but they're implicated in this. And so the reality is that if we want any real information, it's not going to come from the people that, the people that are potentially implicated aren't going to be releasing the information that implicates them. This is obvious. It's going to come from somebody on the inside saying enough is enough. It's time for the public to know. It's time for the public to know the truth. Darn the consequences. Let's get this information out there. Let's let people decide for themselves. And the beautiful thing is that once the information is out there, it becomes extremely, extremely hard to put it away. In the past, you could suppress news stories, because the government could just lean on the news. But now there are too many independent journalists. There's too many independent channels with which you can disseminate information. So what I hope is that this information gets out there. It gets out there from some whistleblower who has a true conscience and a set of morals and says, we need to make this happen. We need to get this information out to the American people. We need to pull back the curtain and see the corruption for what it is. These people deserve to be held accountable. I hope they are. But again, I don't think that the people in charge that are the ones that are potentially implicated are going to be the ones who are ultimately going to pull the mask off, pull the curtain back, and let people see the truth. I think it's going to come from somebody on the inside doing the right thing. And I pray for that person because they're going to put themselves in a hell of a lot of risk from the most dangerous people in the world.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's really the only way I see this going down is because once you do that, it's likely a laundry list of very powerful, wealthy people. And then you play this game of, okay, if you name, let's just say Bill Gates, well, then Bill Gates probably wants immunity if they have proof. And then he names someone else. And then you have this chain reaction where all the most powerful people in the world are naming each other. And it's just complete chaos. But I say it like you said, that is very unlikely to happen unless some brave soul comes out and gains a conscience and is willing to blow the whistle on those people. But in today's world, let's be real, it's highly unlikely. So I don't expect much from Ghislaine's testimony, but I think she'll probably just end up pleading the fifth on just about everything. But we'll see. I remain optimistic, but also not really. All right, I know we got some news about something that happened in Spain today that you wanted to go over next. So what do you got for us, Walker?
Yeah, this is a kind of one in a series of multiple events here, but Spain is currently reeling from its fourth rail accident in the space of a week. So the Spanish rail network has come under very intense scrutiny after a fourth accident, again, in less than a week, capping a series of incidents that began with one of the country's deadliest train disasters in decades. The latest crash occurred on Thursday when a commuter train collided with an arm of a crane that had swung onto the track near the southeastern port city of Cartagena. Now, this injured 6 people. Transport officials said that the train did not derail and injuries were minor, but the incident underscored the growing concerns about infrastructure safety across the network in Spain. The week's crisis began on Sunday with a high-speed train collision in South Andalusia and that killed at least 43 people. This triggered national mourning and a wide-ranging investigation, naturally. But 2 days later, a commuter train derailed near Barcelona after a containment wall collapsed onto the tracks following heavy rain, killing the driver and seriously injuring passengers. On the same day, a separate, less serious collision was reported elsewhere in Catalonia. Investigators have since said a broken joint and a missing undercarriage component found near the high-speed crash site could be critical to determining the cause, while Spain's rail operator, Renfe, said that human error has been practically ruled out in the deadliest incident, which is quite a lot for the actual operator to admit. Now, as authorities are racing to determine whether systemic failures are to blame, the government has ordered immediate safety measures, including speed limits on parts of the Madrid-Barcelona line and accelerated inspections of track and overhead power systems. Spain's main train drivers union has called a nationwide strike, saying it warned for months about deteriorating track conditions, power line imbalances, and repeated breakdowns on some routes. The transport minister has urged caution against speculation, stressing that multiple investigations are underway, but the rapid succession of crashes has already shaken the public confidence in a rail system long seen as one of Europe's most modern, and raised pressure on officials to show that earlier safety warnings were not ignored. So, Hank, I want to bring you back in here on this, because to me, this is, first of all, this is tragic. This is a tragic loss of life. And it seems to be one of those cases where people always say, without government, who's going to build the roads? Who's going to build the trains? But the reality is that it seems that for all the taxes that people pay, for all the taxes they pay over there in Spain, that they're still not even able to get safe public transportation here on one of these main rail lines. So what's your take on this? Do you think that you continue seeing more of the same? And is this something that ultimately, who is held accountable for this? Is it government? Do we just need more regulation? Or is this a different matter at play?
Yeah, first of all, I can't believe anyone's still choosing to ride trains in Spain after that first one where like 39 people were killed, which is insane to me. And it sounds like they knew about these failures in the tracks and systems long before these happened. So yeah, in terms of who's responsible for this, I don't know if there's a director of transportation in Spain. I'm not exactly sure how their government hierarchy is, but that would seemingly be the first person that's got to go. If this has to fall on them, right? And next, it's like this is systemic failures from the top down. These types of things happen over time. This is a repeated pattern of people overlooking these little things that, when ignored for long enough, add up to really big catastrophic incidences like we've seen here. So yeah, I don't know who runs the trains there, if it's a government-run thing or they're privatized. I'm not familiar with that, but this is insane to me. If this happened in the United States, if there was a second one after a first one, people would be up in arms all over the place. Last time I checked, Spain is not a third world country. So the fact that we're hearing this is like the fourth one in a matter of weeks to me is absolutely flabbergasting, and it's got to start with looking at who's at the top right now, because whoever it is not doing their job. What is your beat on this? I'm going on any trains in Spain right now. This is nuts.
I would proceed with extreme caution naturally, but ultimately, I think this is one of those cases where anytime, anywhere in Europe, you pay extremely high taxes. Now, we pay very high taxes in the United States as well, but the taxes are even a little bit worse over there in Europe. And this is one of those cases where, okay, you're supposedly paying all of these taxes. You're supposedly giving so much of your hard-earned money, 40, 50, 60% maybe of everything you earn, to the government under the assumption that they're supposed to keep you safe, build the roads, build the trains, keep it all very regulated, make sure there's all these checks and balances. And the reality is that, any time that the state gets so big, it can't possibly keep everything under control. It can't possibly keep you safe, even though that's really its only supposed goal. But the reality is that it's just not possible. And ultimately, when you spend so much time focusing on other things, no amount of money is going to ultimately just magically fix crumbling infrastructure. What that takes is people doing the hard work. It takes actual investment, and it takes really purposeful capital allocation, not capital being spread around by a bloated bureaucratic state that ends up just spreading it mostly to administrative work. But that's a different story. I think we're going to jump into to our next one here, which is a little bit of a different story here, but moving over to our favorite shiny metal.
We're going to go to a quick break actually before this one, because we have our guest joining us, Walker. But yeah, are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card, buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee, and right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more.
Welcome back to RoxomTV, everyone. I'm Walker America. The price of Bitcoin is approximately 89,224 infinitely printable US dollars per Bitcoin. But before we talk more about Bitcoin, we're going to talk about our favorite shiny metal that you dig up out of the ground in third world countries, gold. So gold prices edged lower after U.S. President Donald Trump backed away from threats to impose tariffs linked to Greenland, easing immediate geopolitical fears that had driven a rush into these safe haven assets. Bullion traded around $4,825 per ounce, just shy of recent record highs, after Trump agreed to a, quote, framework for a future deal on Greenland, following Secretary General Mark Rutte. The cooling off of U.S.-Europe tensions reduced some haven demand, though gold remains up nearly 11% so far this year after a relentless rally fueled by geopolitical uncertainty and policy risk. Despite the short-term pullback, major banks remain firmly bullish. Goldman Sachs, emphasis on the gold, raised its year-end forecast for 2026 to $5,400 an ounce, up from $4,900. Now, 60 tons of gold per month this year, but the Western gold ETF holdings have risen by roughly 500 tons since early 2025. Now, analysts have said that unlike event-driven hedges, such as those around elections, demand tied to concerns over fiscal sustainability and policy uncertainty is likely to be stickier, keeping upward pressure on prices. Market participants also point to broader structural drivers supporting precious metals. So, ongoing geopolitical friction, concerns about independence of the US Federal Reserve, and the weaponization of commodities and supply chains by major powers continues to underpin investor interest in gold. Even as immediate tensions ease, traders say dip buying remains strong, suggesting that volatility, rather than a sustained reversal, is likely due to find gold markets in the near term. Now, to talk about this a little bit, we're going to bring up our guest here, Robin Sear. We're also going to bring back up Hank. But Robin, I'd love to get your thoughts on this first. So, we've seen this massive bid for gold here over the past year. Peter Schiff is dancing on Bitcoin's grave. Bitcoin's been boring. I mean, do you think that this bid, for me, it seems that this is a bit of there's this splitting between central banks who seem to really love gold and they're stacking a lot of gold, especially over there in China and Russia, and then the Bitcoin crowd of things. Do you think that gold continues to catch a bid, or do we start to see that cool off as investors pivot into digital gold, i.e. Bitcoin?
I think, first of all, by the way, thank you for so much for inviting me. But first of all, I think it's very important to note that if you go ahead and make a Bitcoin versus gold chart, you see that Bitcoin has outperformed gold since the last 16, 15 years. And now it's gone down for the first time in like forever. And there's like one tiny bit of going down. The gold price, or like the Bitcoin price in terms of gold, or like if you see the other way around, Bitcoin price in terms of gold is going the other way around for like the first time in like 15, 16 years. Now, honestly, now we know since like 1 year how it feels to be Peter Schiff for like 15 years. And so I wouldn't make like a huge celebration out of it. I wouldn't make a huge deal out of it. It's just that there is now a winning lap of gold. And I'm not a huge fan of like gold versus Bitcoin, even though this was my literally orange pill moment, the gold versus Bitcoin debate. But I think gold and Bitcoin are basically way better than the alternative, the fiat currency. Like if you are a gold bug or a Bitcoin bug, I love you. Like you have the right direction in which I like the world to go. And so having someone that likes gold or having someone who likes Bitcoin, they're very aligned in their thinking. I love, for example, the approach that James Jack is doing, or like even I do it to a certain degree, where you can have a little bit gold in your portfolio as like a cash extension, but don't make it like 90% or 95%. The majority of portfolio, I think, non-financial advice, is always going to be Bitcoin because it's the fastest horse, it's the better sound money, and might even demonetize gold. This remains to be seen how strong Bitcoin can actually demonetize gold over the long run. But over the long run, like Bitcoin will win. The question is just like by how much will Bitcoin will over gold? And also, just as a small additional point, gold is usually a leading indicator for Bitcoin. Now, I'm not 100% sure why this is, but the data just supports that it is like that. That could be the reason that central banks and other big institutions are preparing for something that they already know is coming. And so they're like stacking up more gold because they think this is the safe haven and don't get that Bitcoin actually is the safe haven. And so gold being a little bit of a leading indicator for that. And I personally think 2026 will be Bitcoin up against gold because the market and the macro picture is just like very set up in that way.
Yeah, I think it's a great analysis. And Hank, I'd love to get your thoughts on this too. If we zoom out a little bit further, as Robin mentioned, and during the story as well, we hit on this, but central banks have been accumulating gold, and Russia and China specifically have been piling up a lot of gold. Do you see sort of a split happening where America and Americans and American companies and the U.S. government own a lot of Bitcoin, like a lot of, more than any other country? Now, China and Russia say they have a lot of gold. Of course, we can't audit gold every 10 minutes like we do with Bitcoin, but we'll just have to take their word for it for now. But what do you think the chances are of a real a divergence happening where the U.S. says, you know what, actually, we're not going to try to follow and buy gold. Apparently we still have some in Fort Knox, wink, wink, let's see. But instead of pumping the bags of China and Russia, let's pump the Bitcoin bags of our companies and our citizens and go, move into trying to acquire more Bitcoin versus trying to acquire more gold. Do you think there's any chance of that? Or is that just kind of a pie in the sky dream?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think it's going to take longer than we anticipate as this tends to go, right? Like we've talked about, or Trump has gone out about the strategic Bitcoin reserve. He announced it last year, but we still haven't really seen the concrete developments we would have hoped for at this point in time. But I got a feeling the reason behind that is everyone's looking at the United States to see how we're going to do it. And assuming we do it right, and you need to do it right the first time, you're going to have everybody copying that playbook going forward and doing something similar. Right now, I think what we're experiencing is, Donald Trump, you can say what you want about his methods. They can be effective, but one thing I think we can all agree on is they do seem to drive a lot of uncertainty into the market. I'm tariffing them. No, I'm not. And I'm tariffing them. No, I'm not. So everybody is still flocking to these traditional safe havens, the silvers, the gold. They've been around for thousands of years. We're familiar with them. We know what to expect. Not everybody is still ready for Bitcoin yet, despite the gains we've seen in the last 16, 17 years. To what Robin's point was, if you scale back, it's outperformed gold by so much over that time period. But again, we're still getting a lot of people and businesses and institutions and governments out of this old way of thinking and into this new one. And 15, 16, 17 years is not a lot of time, especially compared to how long gold's been around. So do I see that happening? Absolutely. But it's going to be a slow and arduous process as the United States figures out what's really the best way to do this. And then maybe they start reevaluating the gold in Fort Knox or what have you, and then using that to then buy Bitcoin. I can't speak, I'm no soothsayer, but this is definitely the way things seem to be trending, and I would be shocked if we don't see the real ramping up and start of this, maybe as soon as the end of this year, but maybe I'm a little optimistic. I mean, that's kind of where I'm landing on this right now, but it remains to be seen.
I think that it's a fair analysis, and I maybe want to just, the last thing I'd hit on here is just going back to something that Robin, you said regarding, Bitcoiners and gold bugs, they're really kind of fighting the same fight, right? It's all the debasement trade, right? Trying to escape the inflationary spiral of fiat currencies. And a lot of why do people go into these safe haven assets like gold, like Bitcoin? Well, it's because they want some form of certainty in an uncertain world. And a lot of this, as we heard in this story, this movement in gold's price is really being triggered by the uncertainty around what is Trump going to do around Greenland. I'm curious, Hank and I are obviously Americans. You are not. I would love to get your kind of outside perspective on this. Just what do you see? What is the vibe from the outside looking in terms of the uncertainty around Trump's moves? Do you view it as something, that's like this is him playing 4D chess? Is this just American politicians being their usual bombastic selves? Is there something else at play here? What's your perspective from the outside looking in on all of this?
It's always hard for me to say, but I think overall Trump is doing everything he can to do right for the American people. Now, there are definitely things that I would have not done. There's definitely things that I would also do. But honestly, when I look from the outside in, America seems to be a lot stronger and in a lot better position than it was with Joe Biden. Now, that's just like literally an outsider perspective. I don't follow American politics on a daily basis. I basically only follow the big topics. Now with Greenland, it's interesting because I listened actually today to the speech that Donald Trump gave, I think yesterday in Davos, if I'm not mistaken. And this was interesting for me because he was actually kind of like, if I don't get Greenland, you will remember. Which is, I will not like you, but I will not really do anything. So it's like a more softer approach of like, not like I get a Greenland or I bomb you. It's just like I'll get Greenland or I will remember. And he also makes a claim to Greenland, which I never heard before. I never researched the history, and I'm not sure like how far this goes back. Maybe you guys have more history do that, of making the claim that Greenland actually was, with the World War II, a part of America, and then they gave it back to the Denmark people, which was interesting that he not only just like, hey, we need it as a national security, but hey, actually, we're doing a lot for NATO and we are providing a lot of security for the Western Hemisphere. We actually have a claim to that land, and actually is not only for American security, but also for like international security, Europe, NATO, and the USA. Actually, better if Greenland is in USA's part. No, I myself, I'm just not as like that's why I'm usually trying to stay out of politics because I don't understand those historical context and what's actually going on. I try to see, okay, how can I position myself either way, whatever, if Greenland gets sold or not, whatever Trump is doing, what is the best position that I personally can do, and I always come back to Bitcoin Gold to being just in a great sense for my own likeness, for my own family, and for my surroundings, because this is what we can really do. We can't, most of us that are listening here, and I think all three of us that are speaking here, we don't really have a say in what Trump is going to do with Greenland, or how the European Union will react to it, or what the NATO will do. But what we can do is, okay, I feel like there's a lot of uncertainty coming, and I feel like there's a new Fed chair coming. I feel like there's a lot of liquidity coming in the market. Probably Bitcoin and gold, and maybe if you want to have some amplified Bitcoin position with strategy, is not a bad idea to have. I tend to go as much as possible in Bitcoin and self-custody, and the other thing to play with, so gold and strategy. But all of those things is probably a good idea to set yourself up for success, and the rest of the time focus on providing value for Bitcoin community, for your own family, and for society at large.
That's a heck of a message. Hank, maybe before we wrap this story up, any last thoughts on that from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, this is the way the world is moving, right? And yeah, I think Robin did a pretty good job summing it up. And we actually have more Bitcoin stories underway, including the Bitcoin story of the day I'm being told we need to get to. So I think Robin did a great job of tying a nice bow on that. So let's run the stinger, guys, and move on to our next one, because the clock is a-ticking. Let's go. The Bitcoin price is currently back up to $89,000 at this hour, and that brings us to our Bitcoin story of the hour. As you see over in the United Kingdom, a former Bank of England analyst has issued a warning that sounds like science fiction, but is being taken seriously in financial circles. The warning is not about inflation, war, or debt. It's about aliens. Helen McCaw, who spent roughly a decade working in financial security at the Bank of England, reportedly wrote to Governor Andrew Bailey, urging him to prepare for what could happen if the U.S. ever confirms the existence of non-human intelligence. Her concern is not about invasion, it is about panic. McCaw argues that official confirmation of a technologically advanced non-human intelligence could instantly undermine trust in governments, institutions, and financial systems. Now, if that trust breaks, she believes people will not wait around for explanations, they will move their money. She predicts a rush into perceived safe haven assets like gold and into digital currencies such as Bitcoin, which she says could appeal to people who begin questioning government-backed money. Her scenario, it escalates pretty quickly. She warns that if banks start failing, payment systems could collapse, making it difficult for people to buy food, fuel, or basic necessities. In her view, that kind of disruption could trigger civil unrest within hours. Now, to many, the alien angle sounds a little ridiculous, but the market logic is not. Financial systems already react violently to far smaller shocks. Elections, wars, and bank failures have wiped out trillions in mere minutes. And this thought experiment simply pushes that fragility to an extreme. For people watching at home, this matters because it exposes how dependent modern money is on trust. And when that trust disappears, money does not wait for clarity, it moves. And that tells you more about the system than any sci-fi headline ever could. All right, let's bring the guys back. Robin, I want to talk with you about this first. If people suddenly believed that governments were hiding something that big like aliens, what do you think the first financial behavior we'd actually see would be? Would it be bank runs, market crashes, empty shelves? Would everyone be running into Bitcoin, gold, something else? How do you see that theoretical situation playing out?
If we look at humanity at large, and if we think about humans versus aliens, just for like a moment here, what is the best currency that we could rely on today? It's by and far Bitcoin. It's the only thing that actually could have a chance for humanity as a currency to transact with, to be as fast as possible, but also as safe as possible. It's just like the only thing that we could have going against alien civilization in invading Earth. So from a logical perspective, if something like that, the news breaks of like, hey, there might be aliens out there, which would be hilarious if such a news actually breaks from Washington, D.C. or so. I 100% believe that Bitcoin would be a beneficiary. I think at this point, probably gold would be a bigger beneficiary just because people are uneducated on what Bitcoin actually is. But then also the question is, with that kind of a debate is like, do aliens actually exist or not? I'm very strong in the belief that there is other intellectual life out there. I refuse to believe that we are the only ones. We humans have the tendency to think that we are the best and the brightest and like nothing comes above us. And I feel like this could be wrong. This is like a very arrogant position to take as humans, species, that like we are the only ones out there. Now, the conspiracy theory around like, does the USA cover it up? Do they know something? Of course, they know more things than we do. Do they cover up that there are aliens? I don't know, like probably not. I don't know if this would be a thing that you can even cover up, because it is a very viral thing that there's like aliens existence. So, and there's also just humans working in the government. I don't know if you really can cover that up for a very long time. So I'm not sure about that. Obviously, I have no insider information there. But it's just like one more point. If you look at the world and you look at even the possibility of such a news breaking, yeah, you want to have some Bitcoin. And again, to my previous point, does it exist or not? You're in a better position if you prepare yourself. And even if it doesn't happen with Bitcoin, you're still in a better position.
Yeah. Walker, what do you think? Is everyone in this situation rushing to Bitcoin, or is it gold, toilet paper, something else? We've kind of seen this played out once before. What are your thoughts?
I think the other factor there is ammunition. But here's the thing. Here's why I don't think if we were to welcome aliens here on Earth that have traveled from countless light years away, or perhaps through a wormhole, however they managed to get here. But if we welcome aliens on Earth, let's just think about what that actually means. If let's flesh this experiment out for gold versus Bitcoin, right? I think the price of gold goes to practically zero. And I'll tell you why. If aliens come here, that means that they have probably floated right on by in their spaceship the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. What's in that asteroid belt? Well, among many other things like asteroids, 16 Psyche is in that asteroid belt. What is 16 Psyche? Well, it's a massive asteroid which has a huge composition of gold. Estimates say that the ranges for how much gold is in there is between 10 quintillion and 100,000 quintillion dollars worth. You can't even fathom those numbers. It's enough to make everybody on Earth a decabillionaire at least. So the point is that, if aliens were to come here, they're not going to care for our fiat currencies, our paper money. That's completely worthless. They may want some minerals from us, right? Some things like gold, which have a utility value for crafting things, for building things. But instead of trying to dig it up out of the ground in Earth, or barter with our jewelry here on Earth, what are they going to do? They're going to mine that massive asteroid that's sitting in the asteroid belt, just a hop, skip, and a jump away from Earth here. So that means all the value of the gold on Earth, once that becomes exploitable on that asteroid, that goes to zero. It goes to its utility value, right? Just its use in industrial applications, as it should be. Gold has been in great money for a while, but now that we have Bitcoin, it's a bit obsolete. So I think that ultimately you start, and by the way, guys, NASA has already launched a mission to 16 Psyche. They launched in 2023. They're arriving in 2029 to survey this asteroid. We're going to get some interesting developments. I'm just saying I would be a little nervous if my portfolio was mostly gold once the aliens start coming here and exploiting the metal resources that are available in large amounts here on Earth, but also in our right here in our solar system and other areas. So I think if you look at it, what kind of money would aliens want to deal with? Well, they're going to want to deal with one that is cryptographically sound, that is backed by the energy that is used to create it. That is Bitcoin. That's the only money that aliens, maybe also, guys, maybe the aliens are finally coming because we discovered Bitcoin. Maybe they were waiting for us to prove that we were a sufficiently advanced civilization. And they're saying these guys are still using paper money and gold. They're still using paper money and gold to trade. This is ridiculous. We're not going to go and deal with these apes until they get some Bitcoin. So I don't know, just speculating here, but it's a fascinating thing to keep an eye on.
It is, and I think one important thing that really shapes how this goes, guys, too, it's like, are the aliens friendly or not? My thought is, if we encounter any aliens that actually come here in their spaceship, they're likely not here for altruistic purposes. Like, you think about this, they would probably need something from us, right? Like when we need resources from the Amazon, unfortunately, what do? We cut down the Amazon and we ruin the homes of all the animals and creatures that live there. I hate to say it, I would actually think gold would probably be a more flock to safe haven in this situation because one, like, aliens can mess up our power grid. We don't know what's going to go in there. And then all of a sudden you can't trade Bitcoin if we don't have electricity anywhere, right? And also, like, I don't think aliens give two hoots about this meteor and the belt between Jupiter and Saturn or what have you. But it is a fun question to ask, and I enjoy the conversation hearing about it. But I don't know. I think we're in a lot of trouble if aliens come here because it means they need something from us, and they're obviously more technologically advanced if they got here. So I could go on about this craziness all day. Let's maybe move to the next story and something more here in the real world. Walker, I think you got it for us, bud.
Yeah, sure do. So, and I could also go on about these aliens all day, but alas, we shall move on. But this one also has to do with banks here. So banks are currently, panicking a bit as Bitcoin presents a meaningful challenge to their money printer. So Eric Trump recently warned that, quote, banks are doing everything they can to stop crypto legislation on a recent appearance on Fox News. He said that big banks have been, I quote here, big banks have been an absolute monopoly over our financial system for years, framing the fight as one between entrenched financial power and open competitive money. Here's more of what he had to say. Let's go ahead and roll that video.
I mean, the big banks have been an absolute monopoly over our financial system for years. You and I have joked about it 1,000 times. Why can't you send a wire transfer past 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon? You know why? Because the big banks would love to take hundreds of billions of dollars and have it sit there and clip interest off of it over the course of a long weekend, as opposed to letting you just efficiently move that money using modern day technology, and have it in a separate wallet 2 seconds later. They want to be able to use their money. They want to be able to arbitrage their money. And so, the big banks are doing everything they can to stop some of the crypto legislation for obvious reasons. Why?
So this tension played out on the global stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos as well, where Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, directly challenged a French banker over Bitcoin's role in the financial system. Let's take a look and roll that video as well.
Bitcoin doesn't have a money printer. The supply is fixed, and people will go to it in times of uncertainty, kind of like they did with gold.
Sorry to say that I trust more independent central banks with a democratic mandate than private issuers of Bitcoin, which have a very useful role. But
Bitcoin is a decentralized protocol. There's actually no issuer of it. So that's in the sense that central banks have independence. Bitcoin is even more independent. There's no country or company or individual who controls it in the world. And so, anyway, I think it's a healthy competition because if people can decide which one they trust more, and I think it's actually the greatest accountability mechanism on deficit spending.
Bitcoin represents something fundamentally that central banks have never had to compete with before. It's a global, neutral monetary network that can't be printed, paused, or politically steered. That's not just a technical innovation, it's a redistribution of power. And judging by the reactions from banks, regulators, and policymakers, that's exactly why Bitcoin keeps them up at night and why I think all the three of us here believe Bitcoin will win and is winning. I'd like to bring Hank and Robin back up now here because these are two fascinating clips. One you have from Eric Trump, the president's son, who clearly gets it. There's also been victims of debanking by our financial system here in the U.S. because that was apparently the politically expedient thing to do. The other is from a central banker who, you can see the condescension in his voice. You can see just the fact that he's almost dismissive of it. The same that central bankers like Christine Lagarde have been. Maybe the one central banker I'd give some credit to, shockingly, would be Jerome Powell, who has actually called Bitcoin digital gold. At least there's some recognition there. So go USA. But Robin, I'd like to go to you first on your take from this. Do you think that the central bankers are truly terrified of Bitcoin? Or do you think, like this French central banker is demonstrating, they're just still kind of dismissive and actually don't fully understand the threat to them that Bitcoin represents?
The fact that the central banker called for private issuers of Bitcoin, which is completely absurd, shows how little they understand. I mean, of course, there will be central bankers that understand more and others that understand less. The Czech central bankers, obviously, that they bought like I think $1 million worth of Bitcoin and other cryptos. They understand more than maybe he does. And I want to highlight one thing that Brian Armstrong said. Like he said, like it's a healthy competition. I don't think it's a competition. I don't think they are competing whatsoever with each other because the one is being forced onto people. You cannot not accept euros or dollars. If you are a merchant in the US or like somewhere, I think there's laws, at least in Austria. I don't know how it's in America, that you have to accept the euro. Like if you're a merchant and you sell something in Austria, you have to accept the euro. Like you don't even have a choice. And so you're also getting forced to pay taxes in euros. You also getting forced to do all sorts of things with the medium exchange side of the fiat local currency. And Bitcoin is getting adopted, even though it gets fought off the current system. We have like China with 2013 and so many other instances where regulators, governments are actually fighting Bitcoin. And so they're not competing with each other. The one is replacing the other one. It's like how much did Netflix compete with DVDs? Like not at all. Like it's just like there was a time where both existed, and so it's fun. There's one other thing I want to mention because I literally played that clip also yesterday on my podcast, and we watched the whole like I think 3-minute clip. And central bankers always say they are independent and public. And I think they cannot be both. They cannot be a public good of like being in the public eye. Like, for example, like Donald Trump, he got elected by the public. He in a democracy. And so they always try to be like, oh yeah, we are public, like a government, like an institution like that. So we're not a private issuer. But then how can you also be independent? So you can either be independent and private, or you have to be public and kind of not independent from the political layer. And so like I'm very confused always and very almost annoyed by their language, how they try to confuse people of like, yeah, we are independent, so we are not in any ties with anyone, but we're also public. Like, how does this even make sense? I don't get it.
I think that's such a great point, Robin. And Hank, I'd throw this over to you. You know, he mentions that the central banker mentions that they have a democratic mandate, but you know, I don't know if whether you're a French citizen or, you know, you and I American citizens here. Did you ever remember voting for your money to be debased and inflated away to nothing, Hank? Did you cast a ballot for that?
You know, last time I checked, I don't think I did, but I'd have to review my notes. But yeah, I mean, you know, what this ultimately breaks down to me, guys, and I think you mentioned it briefly during your recap, Walker, is that this is a power story, right? Because Bitcoin threatens this monopoly that central banks and institutions have had over the creation of money for as long as we can remember. And while Robin doesn't think this is competition, I do think it is, because it is another option. Maybe it's not forced upon their people like government-issued fiat. But it's not surprising to me that you do have banks and regulators framing Bitcoin as being dangerous because it reflects their fear of competition that they've really never had before. And when you're at the top of that mountain, I think a real easy thing to do is just dismiss any other person that's climbing up that mountain. In this case, it would be Bitcoin. Because if you say, oh, we're actually better for these reasons, you're actually kind of justifying its very existence in the first place as an alternative. But if you dismiss it, it's like, this was never even a consideration. This was never even in competition. So I think this is a power thing, and big banks just don't know how right now they're supposed to fully coexist with Bitcoin, because it is offering an alternative that humanity didn't have again until the last, 16, 17 years ago. So it's a big shift. I'm not surprised they're balking on it right now.
It's a very fair point, Hank. And I think the other point here that I'd like, Robin, your take, again, as you know, somebody who's not an American, give us a little bit more of a global perspective. But the real, I think if there is a battle here, the key battle is also on CBDCs versus Bitcoin, right? We've seen these central banks want to issue CBDCs. The digital euro has been put forward. Christine Lagarde has been talking about it very happily. What's your take on this? Give us kind of the international perspective on the view of CBDCs.
Yeah, 100%. I think CBDCs and the digital euro, I don't have any faith by central bankers or the government to really come up with something solid. They will postpone and postpone. I think now it's till like 2029 that they postponed, or originally they wanted to start a pilot in October 2026. 2025, it's already January 2026. I haven't heard anything from a pilot. It might be like a very small pilot, so we don't even know about it. I think now the official date is like 2029. So I'm not as afraid as some other Europeans are, because I know we have a different option. I know we have something different, and maybe it actually ties back to what I said before with the no competition. And it's actually a good point also of Hank, of like there are different options, and I view, and that's why I said like there's no competition, because I view it as two different hills to climb. The one hill is like there's a central bank, there's like a different route to climb, and so there is like different central banks, different levels. Like the Fed obviously is like at the top of the mountain, then maybe the ECB, maybe the yen, like Chinese, like all of those things. And we now climb the mountain of sound money. Now, up until now, gold is up there. They just won right now because they have the bigger market capitalization. I think we will climb a lot higher than gold. I think we will climb the mountain and claim almost the whole thing. And the question is just like, will the people climb with us there, or will the people still climb that like central bank mountain? And so that's what I kind of like meant with different mountains, and there's no real competition, but just like it's two different things. It's like the DVDs and Netflix. Obviously, Netflix competed with DVDs, but it's like two completely different things. And so now, when it comes to CBDCs, I think that's just a central bank trying to have a different marketing layer and a little bit more control and monitoring. And so it's like, will it be successful? Yeah, if fiat currencies will be successful, then CBDCs will also be successful. But I just don't think that fiat currencies will be the way forward, because they don't improve on the monetary layer of the underlying asset. And so I do think that people will be smart. And I actually think that having digital rails natively might actually encourage people to flip sooner and faster towards Bitcoin. I could also imagine that stablecoins are actually the CBDCs of choice for governments, because they already exist, they can control it, and they have some kind of like this same network than they had with the fiat currencies. And so why not have stablecoins as their CBDCs? And then we have long-term anyways, Bitcoin to replace all of that. So I don't pay too much attention to CBDCs, and I think Bitcoin is replacing that long-term anyways.
Yeah, and you've just reminded me of something which harkens back, and Hank, I'd like your take on it, to the original point in this summary, which was about Eric Trump talking about the big banks trying to really stop this market structure legislation that's going through. And one of the big things that's hanging up these big banks that they're pushing back against, because apparently the bankers have that much influence over how the laws get written, of course, because there's a revolving door between DC and Wall Street. That's a different story. But it's on this issue of stablecoins, stablecoin issuers being able to offer interest to their stablecoin holders. The banks don't want them to have that ability to offer interest for just passively holding it. Why? Because the banks want to still be able to give people barely any interest as they pocket the overnight rate from the Fed on deposits that they do hold, even though most of it's just fractionally reserved and lent out. But where do you think, from the U.S. perspective here, I mean, do you think we start to have more people waking up to the fact that these big banks are not doing anything that's in the best interest of the people, the customers they're supposed to serve, but are actually just trying to make sure that they still have their rent-seeking apparatus in place and that their power structure doesn't get disrupted? I mean, do you think people are waking up to that, or are most people still just worried about whatever reality TV show they're watching on any given night?
It's sad. I think people often choose to be blind to these type of things until it's too late. People don't feel the effects usually until they really feel it in their pocketbooks. And even with the inflation we're experiencing today, I don't feel like it's really severe enough. You need to kind of see, I hate to say it, like those Argentinian levels, 25% in a month. And we were talking about this kind of mountain of hard money, and it kind of made me think about this a little bit differently. Like, I think of it like this. We have this mountain, right? We have the bankers and the government on top, and they've had things going their way for a while. And in order to get there, it was this really winding route that's really challenging that, frankly, they don't want other people to fully understand how it works, as it keeps them up here. Now we have Bitcoin, which is this own unique tool. It's kind of like having a monster truck that's plowing up at a much faster speed, and they're seeing this being like, oh no, we don't want other people at the top of the mountain with us. Then they'll know how this system works, and we'll be out of a job. So I think it's like they actually want it. They want it convoluted, they want it confusing, and they want the general John Q public to have no idea what's going on, because if they don't, then they're never really going to question this system that they've already been a part of their entire life. And Bitcoin is allowing us that alternative that's like, hey, wait a second, maybe I don't have to trek through this dangerous jungle forest to get to the top of the mountain. I can just hop in my Bitcoin four-wheeler and drive right up it. And you've seen it. In 15, 16 years, we're already scaling that mountain at such a faster pace than anything we've ever seen before. So it's no surprise to me it's a threat. But I don't think people are really going to wake up to it the way we would think they would or hope they would until it's really hitting them personally. And that's maybe just something about the human condition. Things don't matter to us until they really hit us at home. So I'd like to think people are waking up to it more, but it always seems to take longer than we'd expect.
Yeah, my father-in-law always says something. He's escaped from communism, so he's seen some hard stuff, and he always says, Walker, very few people get smart by choice. Most get smart by force. And I think ultimately that's what we're dealing with here. And I think that's exactly to your point, Hank, is that people don't generally look for a solution until the problem is bad enough, until it's acute enough, until it hits home enough. And I think that's the really insidious thing about fiat currency and this constant debasement that happens is when it happens fast, when it's hyperinflation, yeah, everybody sees it, everybody reacts immediately. But when it happens slowly, just 2% a year, 2% theft a year, that's what the Federal Reserve and every central bank around the world targets, because some random central bank, and I think it was New Zealand, came up with this 2% figure a while back. They all latched onto it. 2% theft a year, though, is a lot harder to see. It's that frog in the boiling pot. It's the slow bleed. It's the disease that kills you slowly without you even realizing you're dying. And so I hope that more people wake up. But Hank, to your point, I think the sad reality is that oftentimes people don't. They don't get smart by choice. They get smart by force when the problem gets bad enough. And that problem will get bad enough. The big print is coming, in the words of Lawrence Lepard. So I hope that people protect themselves, even protect yourself with gold, but I hope you protect yourself with Bitcoin too. We'll see what happens. I know we've probably got to get wrapping up here soon, Hank. Was there anything else we had to cover here today?
No, I think we hit all the important topics. I just want to say thank you to both of you for your time. As always, it's such an effort in the Bitcoin space to hopefully educate people so that they can see the forest for the trees before it becomes this really big problem. And you two are two of the best in the biz at helping people understand why Bitcoin solves this, that, and the other. So I'm just so happy that I have the opportunity to chat with you guys. Robin, always a pleasure having you on. Walker, you've been an amazing addition on Thursdays and Fridays, so always a treat, and I can't wait to wrap up the week with you tomorrow. Robin, before we let you go, you're one of the best Bitcoin educators in the space. Real quick, I'm sure you've gained a couple fans that may not have known you before today already. So for those of them out there that want more info, what's the best place I can send them to get more of all the amazing teachings you have online?
I think just go on YouTube. I mean, I think I have to get Hank on my podcast finally to build on that mountain analogy. I would really love to dive deep with Hank on my show on that. So we will set something up, and so people that are a fan of this show can look forward to seeing Hank maybe on my podcast soon.
Love it. Robin, always a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for your time. And Walker, my good man, always a fun time with you. I'll see you tomorrow to wrap up the week, my friend.
See you tomorrow.
See you guys. Thanks. All right, we're wrapping up today's episode here at RoxomTV News. As always, thank you so much for tuning in as we jam over the top stories of every day. We're doing our best to keep you informed and well up to date so that these big problems don't become big problems for you. And in fact, you got solutions before they become those big problems. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to RoxomTV, RoxomTV News, and me at Hank at RoxomTV, wherever you choose to do your online scrolling. And we will be back tomorrow to wrap up the week here at RoxomTV News. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see all you boys and girls mañana. Cheers.